Hello, welcome to another video. This is Steve. I am an English teacher. I went to university and they told me how to be a teacher. So listen to me and I will tell you how to write a C1 proposal or report. Writing part 2, one of your options, a fairly difficult one, but in this video we're going to go into lots of detail about how to approach this task. Planning, phrases, and looking at model answers to say what makes them good, how you can do something similar yourself. Let's get into it. This is what you're looking at in the exam then. This would be a sample task. It's just going to be a paragraph describing a situation and saying write a report or a proposal. In this example, it's a very typical one, transport in your city. And the key thing that I think you need to do here when you're thinking about what to write, when you're thinking about how am I going to do this, is to think about the command words in the question. So what exactly is this task telling you to do? And hopefully, you've had time to read it, you're going to evaluate the public transport. What does evaluate mean? Well, it comes from value, doesn't it? It means put a value on something. Say what is good about it, say what is bad about it. Give it a value out of 10. Give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and so on. Outline what public transport is available, which means a bit descriptive. You are presenting the information, you are saying what there is. And then comment on strengths, which is similar to evaluate really, and make suggestions for improvements. So you need to make sure that in your answer you complete all of these functions. That is the content part of the criteria of the exam. So you need to come up with some, as always in the writing, some relevant, detailed ideas on this topic, talking about transport system. So you're thinking about, do you have an underground, do you have a subway, do you have a tube, a metro, whatever you want to call it? Is there a good bus system? Is there cycle paths? I think we can count that as transport, definitely. All those kind of things. Is it pedestrian friendly? I'm not going to go into too much detail, but that's what you should be thinking about when you read a question like this, because that's for your content. Then we need to think about how to write. And the key question you always ask with your writing is, who am I writing for? In this example, it was for your teacher. Now, obviously, we all respect our teachers greatly. We treat them with reverence. We bring them apples. We treat them as, upper members of society. These are important people, wise people. So you write to them very respectfully. You're going to write in a fairly impersonal or formal manner. And the whole point of a report is to present information. So let's go through the criteria here and think about what this means. Well, language, this is fairly similar in all of the writing. It means grammar and vocabulary, a good range, ambitious, accurate. And as I always say, try and show off some specific vocab for your topic. So like this one about transport, pedestrian friendly. I would love that as an examiner. I would say, well, they know what they're talking about. If they've got vocab like this on the topic of transport, then they must have good vocab on all topics, because this was just a random topic. So that's your language. For organisation, well, this is what I'm saying about a report. The idea is, as you saw in the question, presenting information for your teacher, for your boss, for someone, for the principal, the director of the club, where you're presenting information. So it's all about presenting it clearly. And for organisation, well, paragraphs. But in a report, I'm really building this up, but you probably already know what I'm going to say if you've studied this before. It means subheadings and bullet points, because that's a very clear way of showing information. The great thing with a report like that is I can look at it in 10 seconds and I can say, oh, okay, I understand. Here's the strengths, here's the weaknesses. Here's the bit about cycling, here's the bit about cars. It's super clear. That's what you want for the organisation. So that also comes under communication, communicative achievement, where it's being clear, factual, impersonal, and that's how you're going to get a good mark there. As we say, appropriate register, well, talking to your teacher, talking to a boss, you're a little bit distant, using the typical tricks, using some passive, avoiding the first and second person, using more third person. And the content, well, we just talked about that before, what to write, detailed ideas related to the topic. So that's a bit more how to write it. Let's turn that into a plan. How would I plan this question? And as always, please notice the detail. This is a real plan. And as I keep saying, a plan should take almost as long as you take to write the piece, the essay, the report, whatever. 10, 15 minutes planning is time well invested. because then the writing gets a lot easier and it fits all the criteria better because you know exactly what you're going to write. A report should have a title. So like I said before, you're presenting information very clearly. Well, a boring title helps that. My title is always report on topic, on meaning on the topic of, and so on. In my introduction, I've got some typical phrases. This report aims to, and then your command word, evaluate, judge, offer, and so on. You're going to say what you're going to do concisely, clearly again. Then my first point was to talk about the subway, which in Seville is great. I use it every day. It's very modern, it's very fast, it's comfortable, but there's only one line. It just goes from one side of the city to the other and back. Not so useful for most people. I'm lucky in that my home and work happen to be near the line. Then I'll talk about the tram, which is environmentally friendly. Fantastic to have this in the city centre. Much more pleasant than having traffic in the city centre. But the route, a lot of it covers the same route as the subway. Not very useful. And it's also incredibly slow. You can walk at about the same pace. So maybe it's useful for some people if it's too hot to walk, if you've got some kind of accessibility issue. But for most people, why do we need two transport systems covering the same route? What did I need to do next? I need to offer improvements. Well, these quite logically follow on from my evaluation. If there's only one line, let's build a second subway line going north and south. Let's extend the tram to other transport connections, to the airport, to the train station. Instead of just following the same route, let's connect it somewhere else. A closing phrase then, should these suggestions be implemented, the improvement, something like that. I'm saying you should do this, basically, using some nice expressions to say, I think you should do this, because that's the point of a report, is to report on the situation at the moment and then suggest how it could maybe be better. So that's the report. This is what it should look like. Now, you don't need to read this. This is one I found online somewhere when I was Googling, CAE or maybe even B2 report. I think there's some mistakes in it, but that's fine. It's a real one. But the main point is it looks like this. You can see straight away, okay, it's about the environment and it's about water and air. And I can see solution. It's quite clear. It should look like that. You could also include bullet points, like I said. I'll show you another example of that later. So the point of this is report or proposal. They're always lumped together because they are very, very similar. The only slight, as we can see, why are they similar? Formal, clear information for someone more important making a decision. The main difference is a proposal is more focused on the suggestion. A report is more focused on the current situation, what's happening, and a proposal is more focused on suggestion. However, they can also, they both do some of the same things. A report also makes suggestions. A proposal might also describe the current situation. Therefore, I'm proposing this. But just try and get the balance right. If it's a proposal, it's more about your new original idea. If it's a report, it's more about the current situation and what's happening with it. The proposal will have maybe a bit more of your viewpoint because you're saying what you should do about it. Some questions then about reports and proposals which you'll need to use some common sense to answer. How well do you know different writing types, conventions? Think about the situation that I've described of writing a report or a proposal. And these are true or false questions which you can pause and answer. And here are the answers. Why would a report begin with dear? No, dear means someone that's close to you, dear to you. This is supposed to be a bit more impersonal, business-like, so that's false. This is obviously true. Every piece of writing opens to say why you are writing, except maybe a story doesn't, but you don't have a story in C1. Include a title, I think so, for clarity, like I said. Catch the reader's interest. You don't need to catch the reader's interest. They have commissioned you to write a report. They are going to read it anyway. You don't need to catch their interest. Your teacher has to read it. Your boss has to read it. They told you to write it. You don't need to catch their interest. You need to present the information in a more factual or boring or simple way. 5, this is what we just said, reports a bit more about what has happened, proposals a bit more about what would like to happen. 6, no, they can both have headings and subheadings because they're both using the same register and formality, clarity, as we said. 7, bit of a trick one, that's false. A report can also make recommendations, as we just saw. Here's the current situation. I recommend we do this. 8, obviously false. This is not informal. 9, true. Yes, who are you writing for? This is going to inform how you write. And number 10, no. You always plan. Everything you're writing will be planned the same way. So it's not more important to plan some things than other things. I really don't think so. Everything needs a lot of time carefully planning it. Let's look at another sample task and hopefully you'll see the difference here. You have plans to demolish an old building. You want to save it. Why should it be preserved? What could be done to save it? This is less of a report. You're not really reporting on what are you reporting on. The building is old and unused. It is still old and unused. How can you? No, it's going to be more of a proposal, explaining why it should be preserved, suggesting what could be done to modernize it, and saying how it could benefit local people. So if you do all of that, you can see it's focused on what should be done in the future. How would we plan this? Well, this is how one of my students did it. I suspect he was being slightly funny, but this is not going to work, is it? We don't start with, yo dudes, I used to chuck stones at that building. We should turn it into a nightclub. There's nothing to do there anyway. The ideas are there, but obviously the style is slightly too informal. And a better plan might be something like introduction. What is the building? I've said this with the essay as well, but if it says an old and unused building, if this was a real proposal, you wouldn't just say, save the building, save the building. You would say what the building is. Is it an old sports centre? Is it an old library that's now not used anymore? You would say, maybe even give it a name and save this building. Students can forget these details because you get caught up in, writing good English and all that. But what is the situation? You're writing to save a building. Tell us a little bit about the building. The building, tell us what street it is on. Then why should it be preserved? That was our first question. Explain why it should be preserved. And here you'll need to come up with some idea, talking about the history of the building, the architecture of it, the meaning for local people, the memories that people have around it, the location, that means it's very useful. Then the next point was how to modernize it. And again, these were the first things that came to my mind. This is quite a brief plan. In a real plan, I might be a bit more specific. But we can change the use of it. It's not going to be a library anymore. It's going to be a youth club. Renovate it, add technology, make it more energy efficient, all these kind of things. And how it benefits? Well, let's be specific. If we're going to make a youth club, as we sort of saw in this idea from my student, let's say youth club, not nightclub, then we can talk about how this would benefit local young people who could do courses there, who could get fit there, all these kind of things, make friends, typical things. And then a little summary. And in your summary, you are saying, we should save this building. I propose that we save this building. Using some of the nice phrases that we'll see in a minute, that you'll see in sample answers that you need to learn to use. So that's the report and proposal. That's how we plan it. Let's move on to some useful language. So these are some typical report phrases. If you've been studying C1, you might have seen these before. What I don't want to do is just give you a load of phrases and say, there you go, there's some phrases. I don't think you learn anything like that. This needs to be like an interactive class. So what we're going to do is, I've underlined like the pieces of these phrases, broken down the phrases, think about what they mean to the bare idea. And then can you change it using synonyms to test if you really know how to write these phrases for a report. We'll do some examples and then you can do some by yourself, because if you're doing it by yourself, you are really learning it. So this first one, the aim of this proposal is to put forward a piece of academic research that I would like to undertake. This is basically saying, I am writing a proposal about, it could be a piece of research. I want to do a project. This phrase basically says, I want to do a project. I want to do something. I'm proposing something I'd like to do. So we can change a lot of these words using this nice structure. We could say the goal or objective. You can see what's in bold is what I've kept the same. But we could say the goal or objective of this proposal is to, instead of put forward, present, go over, detail as a verb, a plan, project, thesis, any of these kind of words for a general thing you're doing that I would like to undertake or that I would like to carry out, take part in. You can change that part as well. The next one, what we're doing here is we're talking about, we're saying what we're going to do. We're still in the introduction, and we're saying this proposal is going to talk about this. In this case, it's about a new course, but this could be anything. It could be this proposal outlines the scope of the trip that we're going to take, of the new building that's being built, anything like that. So again, how would you change this? And we could say something like, instead of outlines, sketches, summarizes, introduces, to say what we're going to talk about. Instead of scope, that's a difficult one, but scope meaning like the range, the extent, so I've gone with areas or contents of the new course in this example. Instead of explaining why it would be of benefit, which is a nice phrase, to be of benefit, we can use the adjective, why it would be beneficial or advantageous, and exploring instead of explaining, similar idea. And then I've changed it around a little bit to a passive, haven't I? Some ideas are offered. Some ideas about how the course could be productively carried out are offered. Some ideas are offered. Instead of saying I offer some ideas are offered. A bit more impersonal. Same kind of idea. And then the last one, this one's a bit more straightforward. Why am I doing this? Why am I writing? I'm going to explain the reasons in a minute, but several factors, many points, which lead me to contributing to my, and then putting forward, suggestion, submission of this proposal. So the trick here is to think, what's the idea I want to say? How do I put this in different relevant C1 language for a report or proposal? I've got 3 more that we've done together. Again, pause the video, try it by yourself. And for number 4, presenting arguments with many convincing logical factors that support doing this instead of this, where you're talking about different options for a proposal. To begin with, most importantly, it would foster, promote, stimulate something. You're giving reasons to do something. Well, it would create, foster, promote, stimulate. Lovely synonyms you can use. And number 6, other purposes. What is more, furthermore, additionally, typical C1 phrases. It could result in, bring about this. So these are similar ones for presenting your arguments. But the trick here is, can you make nice sentences like this? You've got an idea. The ideas are very simple. Firstly, it would help because this. Also, it would help because this. Now put that in C1 language using expressions like this. You can try the same by yourself for these sentences 7 to 12, which I've done with my students, and they have always found very useful. These are all typical functions that you'll need to write in the report. So can you do it in your own language? So number 7, for example, the idea here is that my idea is expensive, but it's worth it. It's justified. So expensive, but worth it. Can you put that in your own language? Because you're going to propose some idea and you're going to say, yeah, it's expensive, but it's worth it. But can you write that in a nice way that is impersonal, using some nice vocab, that is, a bit more nuanced, talking about what benefits, all these kind of things. And try and do that for 7 to 12. And I think it's a useful activity. Moving on. We're going to look at one more sample answer, and this one is original because I wrote this one. This one's a report as well, and as we can see, an online workshop. Oh, very modern, very C1. They like this kind of thing, related to your field of study or work. Write a report for the organisers on your experience, strengths and weaknesses, suggest improvements. So it's an online workshop. So if you're planning this, you need to think, okay, I want to be a doctor. Let's imagine that I attended an online workshop on Zoom, Teams, all these kind of things about medicine. And then I need to imagine what was good about it, what was not so good about it, how could it be better? Plan some clear ideas, write your report using the techniques we've talked about, the phrases we've talked about. Here's my answer. And what we're thinking about with my answer is, according to the criteria of a Cambridge exam, what have I done for this report? So my content, you can see highlighted in yellow. You can see very clearly I've mentioned the strengths: engaging speakers, interacted, relevant content. Weaknesses: bad software, no networking. Suggestions: better software, breakout rooms. It all follows very logically. If we've got these weaknesses, then these are the fixes. So the content is all there. And you can, what should be very clear in a report is, as soon as I see this, I can see, okay, yes, they've got 2 here, they're answering the question very clearly. For communication, what we're thinking about here, again, we're thinking about imagine putting yourself in this situation and how would you write? These are maybe there's some big cheeses who organize this conference, some important people high up in the world of business or medicine or whatever you're doing. So you're going to speak to them correctly, politely. I would like to offer some feedback. You're not going to say, your workshop was all right, but I think you should change it. That's way too direct. And no, I would like to offer some feedback is much better. Keeping it in the context of what is the situation. Let's talk about business, because mine was about a business. You can see it's about opening new markets for business people. So let's talk about business. Let's talk about what the other attendees said. This is what you'd say, isn't it? If you're telling them the feeling, the feedback, you would think about the general feelings of other attendees as well. We can use some passive. Here, I don't say the software platform was crap, sorry. I said it didn't work as well as could be expected. So I'm sugarcoating it a little bit, making it a bit softer. The same for breakout rooms should be added. Instead of saying you need to add breakout rooms, no, they should be added. And finishing with a little positive. It was a useful experience because I'm trying to be nice to these organizers, these important people. In terms of organization, well, we talked about our title, we talked about subheadings and bullet points. We can think about, of course, the linking words as well, an online workshop, which aim to give. As I always say, relative pronouns like this is on the C1 Use of English exam. This is what Cambridge think is C1 grammar. Include it in your writing, make sure you know how to do it correctly. Little things like this, they interacted. Who is they? Oh, it's the speakers. I'm linking my ideas together. In every session, the same. I'm introducing my phrase with a relevant reference to the seminar, the conference, with at times as well. And then some more advanced linking words, starting it with because it was online. So I'm just switching around how I'm saying it. And unlike, a little bit more advanced in this way, more importantly. So you can see it's all linked together. And finally, the language, what stands out for me as like something a C1 examiner would say, that's pretty good. This is what we're talking about, not everyday English that they learned in primary school, something a bit more, something they read, something they picked up somewhere. I've got quite a lot. Starting with the present participle. Having done this, I would, very nice, little things like the correct collocation, to give advice on something. You know the preposition, you know to give advice, to take place instead of saying happened. Experts in their fields. This is another collocation that go together. You are an expert in your field. This I always like, enthusiastically, because I've said this before, but this is something you need to do when you are editing your work, when you're checking it. I could have just said the speakers asked and answered questions. And it's true, they did it. But how did they do it? Enthusiastically. Okay, now we're talking. Now I'm describing the situation better. I'm, boosting up, pumping up, punching up the language a little bit. Little expressions like at once, people speaking at once to mean at the same time. Something that's too small to see, just little grammar like this used correctly. This is maybe more something you'd get in B2, like this structure of to, but it's correct grammar. One of the highlights, such a workshop, as in given an example, one way and rigid, slightly varied adjectives to describe what happened. Specific language for this context, like I said, if you're talking about an online workshop, you'd probably talk about video calls. It makes sense. And then allowing someone to do something, allow someone to, used correctly. Each other, another phrase that's always on the grammar exam. And peers, your typical C1 vocab when we're talking about society and this kind of thing. Peers, nice vocab. So that's what makes this a good answer, I think. In summary then, reports and proposals. Point 1, keep it real. Read the question and think, okay, if I was in this situation, what would I talk about? How would I write? Try and think it's a real situation. What's the name of the building? What did you do on the course? Why did you go on the course? Imagine it's a real situation. Think about who you're writing for and why you are writing. So again, this is affecting your communication, your organization. Make it clear, make it polite. Learn some of these phrases that you can adapt to any report or proposal, the phrases I've given you, phrases that you see in model answers. And of course, practice a lot. Write a report, send it to me, and for a small price I'll correct it, give it to your teacher, give it to a friend, check it, edit it like I talked about in that, until you are very confident that you are writing an almost perfect report like the ones we've seen. Right, that's it. Thanks. Bye.